Hello, everyone.
Oh, look, there's our names.
Good morning. My name is Anda. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Knotch and a transparency advocate. A lot of times people ask me why I decided to start a company, because it truly is one of the most painful and irrational things you can do as a human. And almost always I say, because I really wanted to make the internet a better place. When I started Knotch, I tried to understand who was paying for the internet to work, who was paying for all of us to consume the content that we consume online. And upon realizing that it was marketers, I set out together with my team to build a best-in-class technology to help these marketers make smarter decisions around their digital marketing. A couple of years back, after building our core technology, we decided to move Knotch from Silicon Valley to New York. And we had really high hopes for this new market that we were going into, but no context. So I met with a lot of marketers, agencies, and distribution channels to understand the real issues that they were dealing with. And I came away with one big question. Does anyone actually trust their data or the data that is being reported to them? And that is the fundamental question that needs to be answered first and foremost, because as long as the data that is being analyzed is not trusted or truthful, the insights coming out are about as useful as those of the tarot card reader over at the Venetian. In a world where everyone talks about AI, few understand that no matter how fancy the algorithm, the quality of the outcome will be no greater than the quality of the inputs. In most of these first meetings I had, I went in with a Silicon Valley mindset, assuming that transparent reporting and real-time data flows were a given. I assumed that those paying the marketers would have the right to audit and impose standards around their spend. But to my great surprise, I realized that that wasn't at all the case. In fact, I realized that the marketing landscape looked a little bit like those old American Westerns that I used to watch as a kid growing up. Marketers are out there in the digital wild, wild west on their own, fighting crime locally, and moving around from town to town, hoping that the next town's going to be safer than the one that they're currently in. And collaborating is actually making you more of an outlaw. It's difficult to collaborate to impose standards around the spend, and it is precisely because of the difficulty to do so that all the issues around transparency and brand safety are happening today. Don't get me wrong, there's a ton of individual actions that add up to the realization that there's a systemic issue at hand. For example, in 2017, digital ad spend reached $209 billion worldwide, 41% of the market. Nearly 2/3 of these leading US advertisers underwent agency reviews in 2017, and nearly half of those cited transparency as a main reason. So we're talking over $120 billion of media spend under review because of trust and transparency issues. But there's still no consolidated movement to demand transparency and impose omni-channel standards across digital, in spite of a lot of talk and individual agency reviews. With that said, I'm extremely excited to welcome our panelists today, who are true cowboys, but cowboys in a good way, in the digital wild, wild west. Between the three of them, they share a lot of scars and quite a few guns that they've used to fight for transparency. They're all outspoken on this topic and very opinionated, so I'm excited to ask them some tough questions and see if we can inspire other marketers out there to push as hard as they all have for transparency. So I'm going to start with Ron. Ron Amram is the global media lead at Heineken, the second largest beer company globally. As global media lead, Ron directs the practice of brand media strategy, as well as the digital and data-driven marketing agendas for Heineken globally. In his previous role at Heineken USA, Ron led media investment, comm strategy, and implementation for some of the followed brands in the US, including Dos Equis, Strongbow, Tecate, and Heineken. Welcome, Ron.
Cheers to that.
Nice.
Kieran Hannon is the Chief Marketing Officer for Belkin International, encompassing all three, now four, of its brands.
That's right.
Belkin, Linksys, Wemo, and
Finn, P-H-Y-N,
which you just
news
launched.
baby, yes?
Yes. He manages every aspect of the marketing organization and e-commerce globally, integrating the voice of the customer into every facet of the program development and execution. Fast Company named Belkin one of the world's most innovative companies in the Internet of Things. And finally, Lou Pascalis is a Senior Vice President, Customer Engagement and Investment at Bank of America. In his role, he's responsible for comm strategy, media investment and measurement, and marketing, data, and tech platforms for the enterprise. Lou oversees media strategy and investment across traditional, digital, and social channels with an eye toward driving innovative solutions across lines of business. And he also leads the bank's efforts to orchestrate customer experiences in a more personal way across paid and owned channels. So thank you to all three of you for being here today. Let's start with the tough questions. There's a lot of talk about the importance of transparency, but by the looks of it, things are getting less transparent and safe in the digital Wild Wild West. Are marketers turning a blind eye to it? And if not, what's going on? Let's start with Juan over here.
Yeah, I think blind eye is I don't think that that's fair, but advertisers have always been used to a balance between the seller and the buyer, and a layer in between that really validates the exchange of the money for what you're buying, which is the audience, right? Audience was always validated in the TV world, and out of home and radio has always been validated, but in digital, because the center of power has shifted to, most of the digital media is controlled by a handful of players. The power really, and they have so much, quote unquote, data that they don't want to share or lose. It's become a very tough game to really have a controlled balance between the buyer and the seller in the digital world. And that's really at the crux of it. When you talk about transparency, it's two things, but it's all starting with between agency and the advertiser and the agency, advertiser, and kind of the digital, quote unquote, the walled gardens. That's really where the power shift is. It starts with the fact that you have a handful of companies that are so powerful now that they don't have to necessarily placate or play ball with advertisers in a way that most other across the world, most other sellers or media properties do. So it's a tough. Right now, there's not a balance.
But do they not play ball because you're all not pushing hard enough? Lou, what do you think about that?
I think you've got to start with the fundamental dynamic in the media business for the last 70 years. And I wasn't here for all of them, but I was here for many of them. There are two rules. Go where the audience is, verify everything. And for the first time in my career, you can't achieve both of those things anymore. There are too many reasons that you can't get to that level of fidelity that we used to be able to get to be able to look at our leadership and say, yes, these dollars are being invested wisely, they're performing well, and we're reaching the right audience. And I think that everyone has a hand in where we ended up. You can look at your agency in a number of different ways, and we all are very fortunate to have great agency teams. Some of mine is here today. You've got to be the agency's partner, not the person that outsources your job to the agency. You've got to take an active hand in dealing with these platforms and insisting better. I think too much has been outsourced as complexity has risen. And, oh my God, my day job internally, and I've got to get that PowerPoint from my boss, and there's this board presentation next week, and the agency will handle it. But they need air cover from the client saying, we're not going to do this. And you actually create leverage when you're partnering with the client. Sometimes I'm the bad cop and they're the good cop, and sometimes we flip it around. But you've got to be active to win this fight, and it's an ongoing fight.
Wow. What about you, Kieran?
Talk about the Wild Wild West here,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, it sounds
Fighting
like it.
already. Well, look, you asked the question, are CMOs turning a blind eye? And I think Ron's right. I mean, shame on them if they are, but I think Ron is totally right. I don't think they're doing it on purpose. It's like whack-a-mole, data whack-a-mole, right? Everything keeps popping up and down. You don't know what's going on. I'll give you one example. We've talked about, a little bit around the duopoly in those two platforms. There's another rapidly emerging platform around the e-com players, right? And that's becoming a huge part of their business. So when brands like us are actually buying media through those platforms, it does go into a little bit of the Wild Wild West, right? We had this incident earlier last year, where one of our brand buys, our media was turning up, our assets were turning up on some blacklisted sites because we didn't realize this media entity was retargeting, right? So again, that's another example of you just don't know where it's going to go. So it is definitely the Wild Wild West.
So we hinted at these walled gardens, and I'm just curious, how are you working together or individually to push for more data access and for more standards around your digital spend on the walled gardens?
Well, I mean, the ANA, so the Association of National Advertisers, and globally the WFA have really pushed hard for, for marketers and for advertisers to push the walled gardens to more transparency, to work closer with third-party validators. So, in terms of, is there kind of a connected pushing? The answer, I mean, our organizations are. I think, to go back to your first point, we could be pushing harder. I think, and it has to do with, are more marketers aware of what's going on, and are they pushing? Is everyone pushing at the same time and asking for the same thing? I think we could be, to answer your original question, we could be doing more, but at this point, I think every month it continues to increase. I think as more examples come out of when you don't have transparency, when you have people grading their own homework, we keep getting stories, whether it's whether it's brand safety issues, whether it's finding out that viewability scores are not as accurately reported as they were, and they have to restate time spent with our content 4 times in 6 months or something like that. When those things start to happen, then you realize, wow, maybe we should have somebody double checking what's really happening or not, right? So the reality is that trust is earned at the end of the day, and many of these companies have lost the trust, of marketers at some point in time, and it's just a crescendo now this is a topic that's been being discussed for years, but I think every year it keeps getting louder.
So I just want to connect the dots between what Ron and what Kieran said. 95% of Facebook's revenue and 90% of Alphabet's revenue is from advertising, right?
Yep.
If we don't solve this problem where we have the most leverage, as e-com platforms, or take Amazon, which advertising is probably less than 2% of their revenue, I would guess. We don't have leverage there, so we've got to clean the precedent up in the advertising subordinate businesses, because as the ecosystem continues to expand, there are going to be other revenue models where advertising is going to have that much less leverage. And the challenge we have, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like, hey, I'm going to move money out of digital and move it into another channel. We all have leaders, and they all read the press, and they continue to see these negative headwinds around the quality, the fidelity, the safety of the environments we're investing in. And they have other places to invest, whether it's property, plant, and equipment, or personnel. And we cannot assume that they're going to continue to invest in a broken system because we, in our roles, are tolerating this. And that has implications for the entire industry. And we need now to fix this, because eventually there's going to be a board meeting and say the juice isn't worth the squeeze, let's move on, we don't need the source, which is the pain. So
I think, just to add to those points, I think, look, it's the new year, let's have a New Year's resolution. I think those platforms that think themselves as tech companies, they need to call themselves media companies, right? They program, they buy media, they program media, they sell media. What the heck are you?
They even create media nowadays.
Say that again?
They even create media
They even
nowadays.
create media, 100%. So we're in a very important time where they have to recognize that in order to have full transparency to move the business forward. Can you imagine the heyday of network TV? And those 3 TV networks said, no, we're actually a camera company. We have cameras everywhere, right? We got mics. No, we're media, right? So let's call this spade a spade. I think if that doesn't happen, then we're going to continue having these conversations.
So how can you, the 3 of you and the rest of the marketing world, work together, collaborate to impose these new standards without getting into collusion?
I think a big part of this is forcing the dialogue, and I think so many of us have a certain level of understanding about the ecosystem and are sort of doing triage with all the other things in our job, right? If we continue to educate and talk about in forums like this what we need to do to get to a clean, well-lit environment that is analogous to the standards that we held the broadcast TV network to this day, that is analogous to the standards that we hold really ancient media to, I think we'll force enough conversation where the change will be in the best interest of all parties. So right now, it's like, I would say every day, everyone in this room should just try to learn one thing or have one conversation around the broader brand safety, transparency. I'm learning every day. I am, just when you think you've got this thing beat or you have a handle on it, something changes fundamentally that you go, wow, I just didn't see that coming. And so I think you have to educate yourself and you have to educate those around you and force that dialogue and find the time every day to do one thing.
What about you?
So I think the ANA has done an amazing job with this transparency. Transparency has to be first and foremost the most important thing, that all the data you need is there. But I would also say, what is it that you're measuring? That's also equally important. So data for the sake of data doesn't help, right? What is really the data that's helping you understand how the business moves? For instance, you know, with us, we actually, the Net Promoter Score, NPS, is extremely important. We measure NPS on 3 days after someone buys a product, 3 weeks, 3 months, and yearly. So understanding that is a huge factor. We're all about the customer experience. So campaign data really becomes secondary at the end of the day. We really want to understand how our consumers, how our audiences are enjoying the products and the experiences. So, you know, think of other ways that you can get to understanding the long-term underlying health of your brands, understanding those data points, and really build your platform around that.
Going off of what you said just for 1 second, because I think it's a really important point that I see time and time again. Every time we work with a new marketer, we realize that their notion of success is somewhat different, maybe even from one campaign to the next, but definitely different from a different marketer, right? So taking the side of the walled gardens now, does that mean that it's harder for them to adopt new standards when the standards are constantly changing and they're different from one marketer to the next? And is there a way in which maybe you're supposed to come up with what success means across the board
No, because
make progress?
that's not, I don't think that's fair, because the reality is the standards keep changing because we're trying to push for a standard. I think the reality is that it has been for a long time a one-sided conversation where we're trying to establish currency for what audiences are, right? And if we can't get a unified platform that allows, whether it's 5 or 7 or one vendor, that allows us to actually measure audiences across platforms, then you have this, what we have now, which is a whole kind of long skew set of issues. The other problem is with digital is that it's fraught with other issues. So viewability, fraud, and all. So the fact that we have all these problems in the digital world on top of transparency, but verification as a whole is a monster within itself. So it's not fair to say that that we have too many KPIs. Well, we have all these KPIs because everyone has their own little fiefdom, and they're not allowing us to have a holistic industry standard that allows us to vet and control for the best. It's in the best interest of digital. It's not in the best interest of advertising.
To make the internet a better place.
It is. I mean, but they have such a strong piece. I mean, to be honest with you, when you go back to your last question, what are we not doing enough of to push everyone in the right direction? Outside of collusion, which is not what we obviously don't want to do, but
of course.
We're not rewarding the vendors that are playing ball enough, which is making the tough decision to say, all right, Spotify, you're getting mode integration as fast as possible. You're working with vendors. Twitter, you're getting third-party measurement. You're allowing partners to come in and place a layer of security and understanding on who is using what, how often, and how long. Okay, we're going to go deeper with you. We'll take bigger risks with you. And that's the type of, that's exactly what, as marketers, if you want to encourage good behavior, then that's what you have to do.
That's true.
Yeah. So I'm very fortunate to work with some amazing people. One of them is our CTO. He's got this great insight. He says the amazing thing about standards, there's so many of them, pick the one that you like most, right? It continues to evolve. It's crazy. So look, here we are sitting. We have a new platform about to launch pretty quickly, voice advertising. What does that mean? What are those interactions like? What are we actually measuring, right? So again, back to Lou's point, it constantly is evolving. So again, what are the critical data points that we as a group feel are most important? And then at least let's coalesce around that and build over time, rather than constantly changing the goalposts.
Yeah, I would build on that and say this is about signal and quality signal. And if you think about it, the feed algorithm that is used to orchestrate you as an individual, your next experience, is getting smarter all the time. They're really good at reading that signal. We're now essentially competing with that quality feed for attention, right? No one's forced to view anything anymore. So I need the same fidelity and the same quality signal that the algorithm has, so I can create stopping power, so I can engineer some relevance into the interaction. And
again, in the best interest of the content,
right,
of the platform and the advertiser.
Relevant messaging, they have less presentation rate because there's more take rate, right? So it's a mutual best interest, it's a better experience for the user, and it's not a PII request. It's in no way, shape, or form anything other than the same data sets that are being used to orchestrate the individual experience, and Aunt Sally's cat video and Cousin Jean's soccer video need to also work for, you know, the major marketers as well. I don't understand the counter argument. I fail to understand the counter argument. If you're about a platform, you want to create the best experience for your audience, and that includes relevant content, relevant offers from advertisers.
So going just a little bit off script for a second, along the lines of what you were saying, one of the ways in which you can own that relationship with your audience is to just build more direct experiences and to rely less on these channels. I totally understand the point about go where the audience is, but is there a different way in which a marketer could double down on owned efforts and to build that relationship and that loyalty with their audience over time?
I'll give you an example. It's not owned, it's earned, but for us, a form of content that's our #1 priority is user-generated reviews, consumer reviews. What's the first thing you do? Star ratings, right? And then the qualitative feedback on products. So, you know, in the last few years, a particular brand, people would go there to search for products and product information. Today, another online e-com brand, nearly 70% of all searches now start in this platform. Not on that previous search platform, but on this platform. Why? Content, back to Lou's point, what's important to them? The star ratings and the reviews. So we have a big program around ensuring that consumers, when they have a great experience, mostly nearly everyone does, they talk about it, they share it, and it's the right content. So we look every week at the star ratings of all of our products, and if it falls below a certain star rating, we actually may pause selling that product to understand what's going on. So that's another very important data point, in addition to our NPS.
Makes sense.
Look,
anyone else?
You know, there are some big brands that are great at the world of content to the point where they become a destination. Red Bull's a good example, right? You know, we've talked about doing certain things. We work with a lot of, you know, content and that generates more content, whether it's music festivals and music partnerships to sports sponsorships and things like that. But to be honest with you, as a beer company, the brands that we have, we really do believe that we work better complementary to existing events, sponsorships, media content, media platforms.
Quality over quantity.
And it's that, and it's, to be honest with you, we don't necessarily say we want to replace Facebook. We want to work with, we want to go and gather with people because beer is about people getting together. It's about being social. We used to joke it's the first social kind of stimulus was, you know, alcohol was always a good way to get people together and, you know, get them to socialize, right? So we're not looking to replace them. What we're looking to do is work better with them.
I think it's important that you think about what you're buying, because I think for so long, this business was about scale. And I think it's now about scaled engagement. So we'd rather 100,000 engaged people than 10 million exposed people, right? And as you start to do that, as you start to really understand what that means, and if you're in a position where you can take a long-term view of your customer, and you can measure all the interactions, you can start to migrate away from these platforms. And, you know, in our case, we're trying to draw down by a fixed number every year the amount of spend that we do on these platforms, and look in other places and spaces and get smart about it, because, you know, we can't just migrate away from them. And we're hoping, actually, that they'll change their behavior. So, you know, we're sort of on the glide path, but we're really finding that the scaled engagement, generally speaking, works better for us when it's participatory, when it's really something people want versus they need to endure. So it's thinking differently about what you want to do with every interaction with the customer. And it's generally not going to be a one-size-fits-all, lowest common denominator message anymore.
Yeah, well said. We, quality again, so important. So we limit any campaign on the programmatic side to no more than 10% of the buy. So again, really focus, and we do that more for testing than anything else. We really focus on the quality and the environment that you're in. I think that's so important. And I think for brands today, and it's the irony about the whole thing is, we talked about data. What are these platforms about data? And they sell data, but again, they're not transparent with that data. It's so bizarre to me.
So we have a couple of minutes here, so I wanted to end with a question that I'm sure you get a lot, which is how do you ensure that you have trust and transparency in relationship with your agency? Because that's one of the most important relationships that you have. How do you make that work for you?
I think, I'll just jump in. I think it was an eye-opener a couple of years ago. This whole thing started with John Mandel ripping the lid off of transparency. It was on February 5th, 2015. I remember the conversation. And it forced a lot of...
longer than...
It was 15, it was down in Fort Lauderdale. And so basically it forced a lot of very introspective and honest conversations with the agency. And I think we all had a certain level of understanding of what about a fiduciary relationship meant, what it meant to be agent, right, versus principal. I think those things that were implicit in contracts are now explicit in contracts. My master services agreement has grown by 350% in terms of the language, and there's a lot of thou shalt nots in it now. Yeah. But it's also with the vendor community and making sure that your insertion orders are very clear about what is not acceptable and what the consequences are of unacceptable behavior. And they need to be severe, and the vendor community will accept them. So it's very much a trust-based relationship, but we have reaffirmed the expectations of that trust. And the agencies, in our case, have been readily and eagerly accepted those.
Were you, just real quick, were you surprised when that happened in February?
I was in the aggregate. I did not have instances that we were aware of, but we found with our agency, and we went through it. I was surprised by the depth and breadth of what was shown by the K2 report. I was on the ANA Transparency Task Force, and so we got to see the whole report, and it was pervasive, and it was transactional, and it was an entire subcurrency. In our particular case, we were not surprised that there was nothing bad happening with our Publicis shops, but I was surprised that the industry writ large had gotten to the situation it was in.
I still find it bizarre to see these holding companies making at the beginning of the year commitments to a lot of these major platforms, saying, hey, on behalf of our brands and our partners, we're going to commit 100, 200 million to, and I go, hang on a second, right? So that to me is very bizarre. Why does that behavior happen?
To me, it's extremely bizarre as well.
But again, trust but verify. It's all about the partners that you have, and it's actually a two-way street. They should also, trust but verify us. Are we giving them the right data? So it really is about the relationship and how you work together. All of our agency partners have access into our buildings. They all have our electronic cards. They can go anywhere, talk to people, and so it's the right mindset. Hiring the right mindset is so critical.
Totally. And about those commitments, it really doesn't help when they make those, and it takes a bit of your power away when you're having your negotiations with these.
I find it bizarre in this day and age, 100%.
Yeah. What about you, Ron?
Well, I mean, for us, it was, the ANA report for us it reaffirmed, I mean, it probably, to be honest, I agree with Lou, it blew past what we anticipated, but there was a lot of smoke already for us. Like we were starting to, when you start seeing the same vendors recommended over and over, that's when we started raising concerns. So we very quickly changed a lot of it. And to be honest, the agency contracts did not evolve to match the holding company structure, and we just have so.
That's a good point.
So the reality is that the agency business evolved and changed, and contract language did not. So the reality is now that it was almost different than the conversation we were having earlier in the session. The reset, once you change, the agencies changed their contract language, the things pivoted very quickly, I think, when that report came out. I think a lot of things changed fast.
Yeah,
there is a little bit of kind of walk silently and carry a big stick, because there's a lot more auditing that we're doing. We changed the contract language, and we're double checking. And we're doing more reviews, right? To your point, they've had to change their they've had to come to Jesus moment where if you're not being honest and forthcoming with your clients, well, there's another agency that's next door, and we're going to go to them.
Yeah.
So and that's a big part of it's the world that we live in. Now, if you're not being honest and you're not acting as an agent on our behalf with all the media investment that we're doing, then why are we having this conversation, right? So I think the conversation is reset. To be honest with you, though, it's still very much in the U.S. I think the language and the tone is completely changed. But outside of the U.S., there's still a lot of wild, wild west going on where there's rebates going back to agencies, and that's where I think global contracts are important to prevent that from happening.
Totally. Well, I hope we've inspired some marketers to take more action today. Thank you so much for everyone's attention. Have a great CES, and thank you to the amazing panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anda. Thank you.